Luke had returned with a gaggle of kids, who all looked rather overwhelmed by what they saw coming out. There were a lot of them. Tom counted 12 in total, all of them rather young. He guessed the oldest one looked about 9. "Look, dragon!" a young boy shouted, running over to Jax with a few others on his heels. Some were looking around, clearly searching for people who might not be here anymore. Others stood staring at Tom. The sight of other kids also caused a fair amount of excitement, Luke ushering the more timid kids towards the ones from Highstyle. Tom just stood there, putting a hand around Jackie's waist, looking at the best reason for doing all this. He chuckled as Jax elevated his head, just out of grabbing range, as the more excitable of the kids tried to touch his face. He had a smile on though, even if he looked a little unsure of what to do. Zarko was on hand to help though, turning off the kids who tried to climb up the wounded dragon. It took some coaxing, but in the end, most of the kids had been convinced to start playing with each other, though some were still around, sitting, either crying or just keeping to themselves. Lothal was doing his best to try and console his friends, and doing a remarkably good job of it. Tom couldn't decide if he was proud or sad at seeing an 11-year-old acting like an adult. Dinner was nothing special. Just some more of the stew from earlier with some rather stale-tasting bread. Jackie, Tom, Zarko and Unkai had sat together with a lady, Luke, Requiem the healer, who was sort of conscious for the moment. She was apparently called Quinn, at least for short. Unkai too was sitting rather slack-eared, clearly having been put hard to work already. Jairus was given some cuts of cured meat. The lady had brought out both some decent ale and even some wine, which was passed around the table. Tom had never tried dragon ale wine before, so, despite his reservations about mixing alcohol with blood loss, he poured a cup for himself. That was an old student tactic, after all, to donate blood before a night on the town. It made things a bit cheaper. "We might not be able to put together a feast, but we can do this. A small token of thanks. Luke, if you wouldn't mind." The lady went, as she took her seat. Luke standing up, raising a glass. "To the heroes in our hour of need." Tom damn near stood up to join Luke, Zarko grabbing him by the shoulder to keep him seated. As the assembled dragonettes of the keep gave a toast, Tom didn't really know if he felt proud or just uncomfortable at this point. On one hand, he could look around the room to see many faces, most of which appeared happy. On the other hand, many definitely weren't. A lone, wounded father with a sobbing kid, the kids from Highstyle, the countless wounded, some looking like they might not fly or even walk properly again. "To the crazy bastard who made it possible," Jackalope went, as she raised her cup looking at Tom, apparently figuring out what was being toasted. "Hey!" Jarrett set out, clearly trying to sound offended. "To the crazy bastards who made it possible," Zarko corrected, raising her cup. "To wiping those fuckers off the map," Tom joined in, feeling a little left out. "Cheers to that," the Silvered Huntress replied, without much enthusiasm, slamming her drink down in one go. She was joined by the others. Tom took his time with his wine, though. As he expected, it was rather sweet, definitely not bad, though. They hadn't made a huge thing out of the meal. It was just stew and bread, after all, even if their drinks were well above average. It had been a rather awkward meal, though. Jackalope couldn't partake in the conversation unless Tom or someone else wrote down for her what was going on. They all did their best to avoid the more depressing subject matters, but it was pretty damn hard to avoid them in their current state. Quite a few of the others had taken to drinking rather heavily. Tom could hardly blame them, but he kept it mild for now. Jackie, though, did make a dent to the ale supply. She didn't get pissed drunk, but she was definitely inebriated by now. "You know, I've never been called a hero before," Jackie went, leaning on Tom after they had finished the meal. "You still got the ace, though. You always get the ace. Why are you so damn good at killing?" she questioned, hanging on his shoulders. Tom didn't really know how to answer her on that one. "You know what?" she went, pulling back and poking him in the chest with her finger. "You get to teach me how. You're not getting the ace next time." Tom pondered for a second if that was a smart thing to agree to. It was likely going to happen, though, so why not? "I guess that's the smart part about being deaf. I can't hear if you're protesting, so I'm just going to say you agreed," Jackalope continued, before he managed to nod his reply. She poured a fresh mug for the both of them, snickering. Tom debated getting out the notepad to try and tell her he needed to be a little careful when it came to alcohol right now. She beat him to it, though. "You're not drinking like last time. Afraid we might do something stupid?" Unkai damn near choked at that one. Zarko just shook her head, looking a tad embarrassed. "Remember the angry smith, Tom. Remember the angry smith," he repeated to himself. He got out the notepad to write down a response. Tom made well sure no one else saw what he wrote, as he showed it to Jackie. "I'm wounded. Also your mother." She pulled back a bit, looking a little annoyed. "She's not here, nor will she be. Hey, Unkai, can you give him a check? He claims to be wounded. I don't want him dying on me," she went, sounding entirely inappropriate. Even Zarko had to suppress a slight laugh at that. Unkai looking like a deer in the headlights as Jackie's attention switched to him. I mean, sure, I'll just finish this, the healer replied, gesturing at his cup. I can't hear you, Jackalope reiterated, with a side-to-side head bob. Unkai looked very embarrassed, just giving her a thumbs up instead. Oh boy, Tom thought to himself, shrinking down. I think he needs more liquid courage to handle me, though. Watch closely, Unkai, you might learn how to grow a spine, even if it's only for a bit, Jackalope continued, laughing at her own joke as she poured another drink for herself and refilling Tom's cup. The man who went toe-to-toe with a small army and he needs help to handle you? What does that tell you? Zarko let out, looking at Tom, seeming very pleased with herself. Don't let them get you, Tom. You're braver than her, Jarrix added, ensuring that everyone in the entire hall was now invested in the conversation. Tom just picked up the mug of ale she had poured for him. Jackalope excitedly raised hers as they gnawed them together. May the hangover have mercy on my soul, Tom thought to himself. He had been saved after a few mugs by the lady declaring that they needed to save enough for a proper feast when they could manage it. The result was a nice buzz and an even cockier Jackalope as they left the table. Perhaps it was her time for some healing following that whole shit show. He'd never seen her as distraught as she was at Highstall, not to mention the expression on her face when Zarko had carried the body of the dead girl away after they landed. Apparently alcohol had at the very least helped her think about something else, as she was spouting funny stories and, of course, boasting about how amazing she had been in the battle. That had led to a hasty explanation about how Tom had let her borrow some of his power during the battle. He wasn't entirely sure if any of the locals bought it, but they were way too polite to question the explanation though. Or possibly scared. Or just didn't care. He wasn't quite sure. Unkai had gone over Jackalope first and deemed her as fixed as she could be right now. He didn't dare try to fix her ears, claiming that to be way beyond him. He sounded confident that the Nook might be able to put them back together again though. Jackalope let out an annoyed sigh at the news though. The part about the Nook did help. It was clear Jackie and Tom had received priority when it came to getting fixed up after the battle. Unkai had put in some work on Tom, mainly putting his effort into the stinger wound on his side. Tom had him check his neck wound as thoroughly as he could manage, but Unkai claimed that was as good as it was going to get, though he recommended some resting time. Fuck. I took painkillers earlier, Tom let out, as Unkai touched the stinger wound, which didn't hurt as much as it should have. Is that bad? Unkai had questioned, looking at the wound. I drank alcohol too, you're not supposed to mix those. Unkai looked at Tom as if he was expecting more than that. Well, don't look at me, I don't know how they work, he finally responded. Jackalope's face growing worried at the exchange, her gaze breaking as she looked at Unkai. He's fine, right? He's been stunned before, he's tough on that front even if his skin is soft like a kid's, she asked with worry in her voice, slowing slightly. Tom taking slight offence at the last part. Unkai turned to her, giving her a thumbs up and a smile, before looking back at the wound. Anything we can do about it? The healer questioned, clearly trying to not look worried this time for Jackie's sake. I don't think so. I guess I'm gonna cross my fingers and wait it out, Tom answered truthfully. He had no clue what the actual effect of that might be. He felt fine though. He was a little weird in the head, but that was honestly to be expected in his current condition. Well, I don't think you are going to be sleeping alone anyway, but consider it medical advice to have someone look after you, Unkai replied, trying a sly smile, which just looked wrong on him. Tom the Hot Stone reporting for duty, Tom joked back, as Unkai went about reapplying the bandage to the wound. Jackie's gaze switching back to Tom, seemingly excited, the edges of her mouth curling into a slight smile. The young woman who had washed his clothes earlier had shown them up to the bedrooms after the quick check-in. We have a few rooms which weren't in use before. Don't worry, it's not someone's. I'm sorry if they are dirty, but you can have one each if you want. She sounded really rather uncomfortable. Tom could get why. He could see the number of rooms, and there had to be at least a few that had owners until recently. This is very kind of you, thank you, Tom replied, the woman giving a curtsy before making her way back down the stairs rather hurriedly. Tom got out the notepad to ask Jackie if she wanted to share a room. Thinking back, that wasn't at all necessary. He just felt like it was the right thing to at least ask. Jackalope, though, didn't bother to ask him. Taking him by the wrist rather firmly, she led him into the first room the young woman had shown them.
Hello there, Deathwalters. This is Captain Uton speaking. Unfortunately, as per ship regulations, we're not allowed to have any sexual content on this YouTube channel. But don't worry. If you sign up to Patreon and register your clearance level at the Space Commando tier and above, you can enjoy pancakes, degeneracy, and other naughty things you don't get on the main channel. as well as support Net Narrator in putting out HFY content. I highly recommend doing so. Now, has anyone seen Petty Officer Sheeter anywhere?
Balathon now safely in her grasp, Sapphire circled back the way she came. She almost wanted to tell him to enjoy this, since she was likely not going to be carrying him again, not to mention at night in nothing but her underwear. The dude had already had a remarkably shitty night though, so she refrained. She spotted the large disorganized group, which had been supposed to keep the tavern safe. They had sat down in a square, and were looking around confused as Sapphire came into land. She was quickly greeted by a near-hysterical Heiko, who looked ready to drop his mace as he nearly trod on Balathon in an attempt to hug her faster.
"You're okay, right? Nothing wrong?"
"I'm fine, the bastards couldn't shoot."
"Oh, thank whoever cared,"
he let out, squeezing her tightly. "Where is Dakota?" Sapphire squeaked out from his embrace. He let go of her, taking a step back, looking around.
"Not here, neither is that Micah guy, and he down there caught up to you before you shot off into the darkness. You haven't gotten any slower, have you now?"
"Not by much, no," she replied, looking down to her stricken cargo. "Let's get him to sit up somewhere. Any of you got some water?" she questioned, looking to the other guards. Her eyes landed on someone being bound up. She assumed it was the mercenary who had tried to attack her. "You're a ship fighter, I hope you know that," she shouted out, glaring at the arsehole, who just stared at her with clear contempt. Draki had come over with a canteen of water, looking up to Sapphire and looking a bit strained in the face before he turned to Heiko. "I owe you 2 silver, don't I?" the diminutive guy asked, seeming rather annoyed.
"I told you she's the fastest woman you ever saw," Heiko replied with a smile, trying to fold out Balathon, eventually giving up. "Grab on, let's put him on that bench over there," he went, grabbing Balathon by the legs, with Sapphire taking the shoulders as they carried him over. He was stiff as a board, though the panic look in his eyes was at least sort of gone. "You put a bet on me catching them?" Sapphire questioned, as they set him down. She wasn't sure if she should be flattered or angry. Heiko held up his hands defensively, shaking his head. "No. Draki just didn't believe all the stories, so I put 2 silver on the stories being true. Easiest bet ever." That was more to Sapphire's liking, and she gave him a slightly wicked smile. "You know, we used to get a slice of the bets back then." "Hey, I got you your own personal protection service," he replied, gesturing to the motley collection of dragonettes mulling about the square. "That's the word for it, I guess," Sapphire replied, not overly impressed. It wasn't like they had done much good tonight. "Take good care of him, I have some questions," she went, leaving Heiko and going over to the now thoroughly tied-up dragonette who had attacked her, the questioning already underway. Someone let out a suggestive growl as she walked by, the fact that she was wearing nothing but her underpants in the middle of the street dawning on her. "Do that again and I'll kill you," she snarled, not sure who the offending member was, before turning her attention to the mercenary. "So, you thought kidnapping one of my friends was a good idea? How well would you say that went?" she questioned, looking down at the piece of shit. "Fucking brilliantly," he responded angrily. "I ended up with a nice view if nothing else," he continued, with a shit-eating grin. "How hard may I punch him?" she demanded, looking around at the guards. Most of them just looked confused at each other. "As hard as I say so," Micah bellowed out, coming down alongside Dakota, who was carrying a very large, unconscious female dragonette with an arrow sticking out of her back. "Not your best shot, but it did the trick," Dakota let out, unceremoniously dumping the dragonette on the ground before settling down. "Tie her up too, she won't be out forever." After a bit, they got the both of them tied up at about the same time as a contingent of city guards arrived, demanding to know what was going on. Sapphire cursed the fact she likely wouldn't be allowed to beat the shit out of them now, as they began asking some very pointed questions. "Oh, yeah, sure. A group of armed, what was it, tavern guards? Out at night with a pair of half-naked women and a dude who claims to be Royal Guard. And why has she been shot?" the lead city guard questioned, looking around at them. "Because she kidnapped him after stabbing him with Valgroth poison," Sapphire let out, wide-armed. "How the fuck is that hard to understand?" "Calm down, woman. Who shot her?" the man questioned, pointing at the female mercenary. "I did, and 2 other pieces of shit who tried to kill us." "Right, you're all coming with us. We need to know what happened here. Manacles," the city guard replied, snapping his fingers over his shoulder and receiving the item in question. Sapphire's heart sank. She had never been arrested before. Closest she had ever gotten was being given a stern talking to for sneaking into the training fields. Dakota looked ready with a reply when Micah beat her to it. "Listen up, you little shit-eating ground rat. See what this is?" he went, holding up his sword, which true to form bore the royal insignia on the crossguard. "I'll make a cape out of your fucking wings if you don't man up and do your fucking job. These bastards attacked a tavern in the middle of the night, attempted murder, managed a kidnapping, and then had to go and murder again during the desperate chase to catch them, and your useless ass turns up just in time to insult the Royal Guard and be useless." "I'm gonna have to ask you to,"
The city guard attempted to protest, though seemingly with a growing sense of apprehension. No, you may not. You are outranked. Do I need to get the colonel to inform her the city guard is aiding an enemy of the crown? That will lead to some serious fucking cleansing of your unit, I can assure you of that. In that case, I say we take you to the Stockade and send for this colonel of yours, perhaps letting her know someone stole a blade from the Royal Guard armories. Sapphire expected Micah to explode at that insult, who just pulled back with an evil smile. Very good, sir. Let's go. Though I'd appreciate the opportunity to get my uniform before appearing before my superior, you may escort me to the tavern in question if you wish. That could be arranged. I assume you two wouldn't mind getting dressed either, though I must insist on you accompanying us. Don't we have a blanket or something? He asked, looking back to his unit, eventually procuring a pair of thin woolen blankets. Bloody brilliant, sir. How exactly do we fly with these? Dakota questioned, sounding very unimpressed. As they were getting ready for takeoff, Sapphire heard someone get a smack to the back of the head as she moved to check up on Balathon. Looking back, a slightly ashamed-looking tavern guard was rubbing the back of his head, a very unimpressed woman standing next to him. God fucking damn it, she cursed to herself. The ones who had woken up in the middle of the night broke off, going back to the tavern to get dressed in preparation for a long night. They wanted the bosses interrogated immediately anyway, even if getting interrogated themselves hadn't really been the plan. If this was the work of the Flaxons, they would be doing their best to cover their tracks as soon as they learned of the mission's failure, so speed was of the essence. Why can't we just be left in peace? Dakota snapped as they were getting dressed. Please, they'd just be the Flaxons so we can get them dealt with already. Of course it's them, who else could it be? Sapphire dismissed her as she strapped on her greaves. Sapphire had a feeling Colonel Hashur would not take kindly to this attack, so she was bound to be there. Therefore she needed to look proper in case they got fine company at the Stockade. Micah had gone on to the Hashur estate to report back on the evening's activities, and hopefully convince Victoria to make an appearance. So Sapphire and Dakota found themselves standing in front of the Stockade, with a city guard escort. It was a large, ugly building, looking like a place you wanted to avoid at all costs with its rough grey stone and metal bar cell windows lining the walls. May they rot in here forever, Sapphire let out as they were shown inside. She and Dakota were taken to different interrogation rooms. They were civil about it though, not even tying her up like she had feared. The guy who had caught them, as he claimed, was apparently in charge of this case. He formally introduced himself as Sergeant Lannock and set about asking questions, not many of which were intelligent. Where they were from, what they were doing here, and why they had an armed escort in the middle of the night despite not even being properly dressed at the time. He, of course, didn't believe most of the answers he was getting, especially the part about being in the employ of the king at the moment, nor the whole Flaxon situation. What? You claim to be the target of a kidnapping attempt by a noble family? One of the council with that? Give me a break. Sapphire had to fight really hard not to slap him, but she didn't want to end up in manacles, so she just stared at him contemptuously. Then there was a deep thunk that shook the building, followed by creaking wood from above. This should be good, Sapphire let out, leaning back with a smirk, relishing in the confusion on the guy's face. It took a bit longer than Sapphire had anticipated, as she refused to answer further questions, but there was eventually a knock on the door, Sergeant Lannock getting up to answer it. He was confronted by a very pissed-looking Colonel Hashur in formal uniform, Myko, and Yiltz at her back. You seem to have attempted to arrest one of my men, and two people you really shouldn't have. Not to mention waking both me and a decidedly grumpy 10-ton black dragon currently on your roof. So it wasn't Baron then, Sapphire concluded. She doubted very much he could have been roused for this anyway. It also made sense to bring a black, they liked the night anyway. Myko had been decent at laying out a string of insults, but Hashur was clearly the source of his talent, as she chewed out not only the sergeant, but anyone dumb enough to make an objection, or not make themselves as small as they could, including the captain of the Stockade, much to Sapphire's horror. It definitely helped that she was flanked by Yiltz, the person who had been tasked with finding out who the mercenaries were, as well as a few other family members. The dragon in question was apparently Tiguan, one of Jarek's training buddies. Sapphire guessed he was here just as much for a bit of experience then. Is there anyone dumb or useless enough in here to have anything more to say? Very good. Where are the two who actually need questioning? The tavern guards had been allowed to go, though Hiker was stuck around. The sergeant was now looking very small as he took them to the room where the one who hadn't been shot was sitting, the woman who had been carrying Balathon currently being treated. Do you have even the slightest idea how much you fucked up tonight? Ashura asked, as she strode in the door, the sergeant holding it open for her. Pretty fucking badly, I assume. What the hell are you gonna do, huh? Gonna execute me, perhaps clip my wings? Doesn't matter if you're Royal Guard or Tavern Guard, the punishment is the same. So you don't scare me, woman, or should I say, oh, Colonel. Wow, I really did fuck up, huh? Well, Sapphire had to give it to him. He was taking the news that he was likely done for rather well, Or perhaps he was just in denial about the whole thing. "Oh, I can do worse than that, I think. Sapphire, you wouldn't happen to have learned a thing or two from our friend?" "Might have done," she admitted, thinking back to what she could remember of Tom's escapades. "Sergeant, what is the punishment for his crimes?" "Well, he failed to kill anyone, hence he is charged with attempted murder and attempted kidnapping, so indentured servitude for quite a while, unless he could pay for a prison sentence, of course." "Right then. How about this? Tell me who sent you, and I will pay for your prison time," the Colonel then went, looking to the perp. "I know you are hired to do this, so while you may be a piece of shit, it's not you that I want. Alternatively, I could start pulling strings until we get some alone time with you, and make your life really fucking unpleasant." Sapphire looked slightly nervously to the sergeant, but he was still cowering, so she guessed Yrrol got away with threatening to break the law inside the Stockade. It was a generous offer too. If this guy was going away for a long time, paying for it wasn't going to be cheap. "You know my choice is death or slavery here. You can't be dumb enough to believe they'll let me live if I talk." "That depends on who sent you, because if it is who I think it is, they won't be around to send someone to kill you after this." Again, Sapphire was fairly sure they couldn't condemn the entire Flaxen family for something like this, but hey, if it works, it works. "You seriously think we take jobs directly? It's not the client that will kill me, dipshit. My boss would." Yrrol was very clearly not pleased with that answer, as she turned to the sergeant. "Would you agree this man is guilty, on the word of both independent tavern guards, the Royal Guard, and our 2 Huntresses of the noble Bismarcky Keep, or do you insist on a mock trial for this piece of shit?" The sergeant looked a tad bewildered for a second before nodding. "Yes, ma'am. I'll have him sent off to the deepest mine I can find tomorrow." "No. I wanted him handed over to the Royal Guard so we may question him as an enemy combatant." "You cannot do that and you know it," the Sapphire replied, finally standing up for himself, clearly to Yrrol's great annoyance. "Then I want you to get me a telepath. Am I correct in assuming his rights on that matter are no longer in place, even if I can't pull his claws out?" "Yes, but we don't have one, ma'am. You must understand, a criminal's mind is not exactly the kindest place to be." "Weak-minded cowards!" Yrrol cursed, looking away, pondering. "Fine, keep him here. You may continue with your excuse for questioning. I'll be back. Luckily, not everyone is as weak of spine."